Have you ever wondered what the world was like before Great Flood? A time when angels walked among men, when forbidden knowledge was unleashed upon humanity, and when giants terrifying and powerful roamed the earth. This is a mythology. This is a forgotten chapter, hidden in ancient scrolls, feared by those in power. This is the story of how celestial beings fell from grace and nearly destroyed the world. In the age before the flood, the world was vastly different. The mountains stood taller, rivers ran purer, and the earth was untouched by the taint of corruption. Mankind was still young, naive, and fragile. Yet the heavens watched. God, the Almighty Creator, assigned 200 angels known as the Watchers to descend from the heavens to observe and guide humanity. They were not meant to intervene, only to monitor and report. Chosen for their wisdom and strength, these divine beings were entrusted with a sacred duty. But even the most radiant light could be tempted by a shadow. The leader of these Watchers was a mighty angel named Semiaza, charismatic and bold. Semiaza inspired loyalty among his brethren, but his heart was troubled, stirred by the beauty of mortal women. As the Watchers walked among men, they began to lust after the daughters of earth. Their radiant forms, though divine, longed for the pleasures of the flesh. It started with whispers. Why should we be denied what we desire? Semiaza voiced these thoughts, planting seeds of rebellion. The Watchers, one by one, began to agree, but they feared the consequences. They knew that breaking the divine law would doom them. Semiaza, aware of their hesitation, proposed a pact. Let us bind ourselves with an oath. If we are to fall, we fall together. And so, on Mount Hermon, the 200 Watchers swore an unholy oath under the stars, sealing their fate. They descended not as observers, but as invaders. They took human wives, violating the natural order. The skies wept at their betrayal. From these unholy unions came a Nephilim beings of immense size and power, half angel, half human, fully monstrous. This is the moment humanity crossed into darkness. When the divine mingled with the mortal, chaos was born. As I reflect on this part of the story, I'm struck by how easily even the most sacred beings can fall. It reminds me that no one, not even angels, are immune to desire, pride, or temptation. Semiaza wasn't just rebelling against God. He was redefining what it meant to be divine. And that hubris, that willingness to believe they could outsmart the Creator, is where all tragedy begins. Among these Watchers was Azazel, a powerful and cunning angel who did more than simply take a wife. He brought forbidden knowledge to mankind. He taught men to forge swords and knives, to make armor, and to wage war. He taught women the art of seduction, adornment, and enchantment. Vanity, lust, and violence began to flourish. Azazel's teaching spread like wildfire. Tribes once peaceful turned to conquest. Jealousy and greed infected human hearts. Magic, sorcery, and manipulation corrupted the minds of the innocent. The Watchers had not uplifted mankind, they had corrupted it. The Nephilim, their monstrous offspring, grew rapidly. Towering above men, they consumed everything. Animals, trees, crops, all devoured. But their hunger was insatiable. They turned on mankind, devouring humans like cattle. Blood soaked the earth. And when there was nothing left, they turned on each other. The world spiraled into madness. The harmony of creation fractured. Humanity cried out for help, but the heavens were silent. What strikes me most is that knowledge, in the wrong hands, is more destructive than ignorance. Azazel thought he was enlightening humanity, but he was planting seeds of self-destruction. There's a lesson here. Not all knowledge is meant to be shared. Not all power leads to progress. Meanwhile, The Watchers watched in horror. They had created monsters. The very beings they were sent to protect now suffered because of them. But it was too late. A rift formed among the Nephilim. Some retained remnants of human conscience. Others embraced their monstrous nature. One such Nephilim, Mawe, began to dream. He saw visions of destruction, of water swallowing the earth, of fire raining from the sky. He dreamt of names he did not know: Noah, Shem, Japheth, Ham. He brought these visions to his brethren, but they were confused. Who were these names? What did the dreams mean? Was it prophecy or madness? But Mawe was not alone in his visions. More Nephilim began to have strange dreams. Nightmares of judgment, of annihilation, of a being far more powerful than any angel, whose wrath could not be escaped. Fear crept into their hearts. Not just the Nephilim, but the Watchers too. They knew the Creator had seen all. And soon, judgment would come. The descent of the Watchers marks a turning point in the cosmic story. It's not just a tale of rebellion, but a warning. When those meant to guide us betray their purpose, the consequences are catastrophic. This ancient text doesn't just speak of angels and giants, it speaks of us, of our choices, of how power, when misused, can devour even the divine. And this is only the beginning. The silence that once veiled the heavens had been shattered. In the aftermath of the Watchers' descent, the earth no longer groaned in quiet suffering, it screamed. The 200 angels who had sworn their unholy oath upon Mount Hermon were no longer observers. They had become rulers, tyrants cloaked in divine beauty, gods among mortals. Each of them had taken a human wife. The children born of these unthinkable unions were not ordinary. They were giants in the Nephilim, towering, violent, insatiable, and soon the world would learn these abominations were not the end. They were only the beginning. There were giants in the earth in those days. Genesis 6 verse 4. The children of the Watchers did not crawl before they walked. They did not babble before they spoke. From the moment they drew breath, they devoured. The earth itself recoiled. These beings were monstrous in size and even more monstrous in spirit. Towering above mountains, they stomped across forests, tore apart cities, and demanded worship. They consumed with no restraint. First animals, then men, then each other. Even their own kin were not spared. The Nephilim weren't just giants, they were predators of civilization, erasing everything in their path. Villages burned in their wake. Rivers ran dry under their thirst. Mountains trembled beneath their weight. The sky itself seemed to grow dimmer each time one roared. And what did the Watchers do? They celebrated the reign of terror. The world became a blood-soaked playground. Entire generations of humans vanished. The Nephilim established dominions. Cities bowed not to kings or gods, but to these towering monstrosities who demanded tributes in flesh. The Watchers, now corrupted entirely, taught their wives and children forbidden arts, sorcery, the use of roots and herbs to manipulate life, astrology to defy divine order, metallurgy to forge weapons of domination, and occult practices that made men forget the heavens entirely. They turned men into murderers, women into enchantresses, and children into sacrifices. Humanity became enslaved to its own nightmares. A world without innocence. There were no more children's songs, no more peace, no more hope. The Nephilim had no empathy. They ruled not as kings but as catastrophes. Everywhere they went, they left behind twisted forests, scorched earth, and skies blackened with smoke. The earth, a gift once bathed in divine light, now lay dying. But there was something even darker stirring beneath it all. A madness, a hunger that the giants themselves could not understand. They began to hear whispers echoes from somewhere beyond the stars. A voice, something ancient, something waiting. Dreams of doom. The Book of Giants tells us that the Nephilim began to dream. Terrible dreams. Dreams of destruction, floods, and the end of all things. In these visions, mountains were swallowed, skies fell, and oceans rose with fury. The giants screamed awake, clawed at the earth, terrified. But they didn't understand why. They had never known fear until now. The dreams were sent by a higher power, a warning, a judgment whispered into their very souls. But it was already too late. The heavens had seen enough. Reflections, power without purpose. There's something disturbingly familiar about the fall of the Watchers and the rise of the Nephilim. They were not born evil, nor did they fall all at once. Their descent began with a whisper of pride, a flicker of desire, a hunger to possess and rule rather than to serve. Isn't that the same descent we see in history? In tyrants who began with noble dreams, only to become devourers of men? In people who compromise once, then again, until they no longer recognize the reflection in the mirror? This tale is not just ancient myth. It's a warning etched across time, a cry from the earth. According to the ancient texts, the earth itself cried out to the Creator, not metaphorically, literally. It wept under the blood of the innocent. It screamed under the weight of the Nephilim, and heaven heard. A decision was made, not by wrath, but by sorrow. A reckoning would come, and it would drown the world. But first, the Watchers had to be judged, and one among them would rise not in rebellion, but in regret. His name was Enoch. Enoch, the last hope. While the Nephilim ravaged the earth, while the Watchers basked in corruption, one man walked in quiet righteousness. Enoch, he was not like the others. A sage, a prophet, a man of great understanding. He could see the poison spreading. He could hear the whispers of judgment. And soon, the Watchers would seek him out. Because even they, these fallen angels who defied God, began to tremble. Their dreams haunted them. Their children devoured them. Their reign, once glorious, was now a nightmare spiraling out of control. They needed answers. They needed hope. And so they turned to the one man still heard by heaven, Enoch. Personal insight, monsters of our own making. Reading the Book of Giants forces us to confront a deep truth. Sometimes, the greatest monsters are not born, they are made. The Nephilim were not evil for evil's sake. They were the consequence of arrogance unchecked, of knowledge abused, of lust unrestrained. We, too, create our own giants when we allow power to corrupt, when we ignore the suffering of the earth, when we silence the voice of conscience. This story is not just about angels and giants. It's about us. They thought they could defy heaven and get away with it. They believed their power, their oaths, their monstrous children would shield them from consequence. But no sin escapes the eye of the divine. No rebellion goes unanswered. What happened next shook the heavens and the earth and sealed their doom. Far above the chaos and bloodshed on earth, the angels of heaven watched with growing grief and fury. The cries of humanity had reached the throne of God. The corruption spread by the Watchers and the violence of the Nephilim had become unbearable. And so, the Creator summoned his most trusted archangels. Michael, the warrior of God. Raphael, the healer and purifier. Gabriel, the divine messenger. Uriel, the flame of God's judgment. To them, God gave a decree. Go down to the earth, bind the Watchers, cast them into the depths, and as for their children the Nephilim, cleanse the earth of their abomination. The archangels descended in terrible splendor, carrying out divine justice. Michael led the charge against the Nephilim, wielding a sword of celestial fire. Entire battalions of giants fell before him. Their cries echoed across valleys as they were slain one by one. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel, the angel who had taught mankind the art of war, now faced the consequence of his betrayal. Raphael cast him into a dark pit in the desert, a prison of jagged stone. Chains of holy fire bound him until the day of judgment. Gabriel turned his wrath upon the watchers who had spread forbidden secrets. His voice thundered across the skies. You were meant to guide, not corrupt. For your sins, you shall witness the destruction you brought forth. Uriel, the angel of revelation, was sent to Noah, the man who had survived the coming flood. He whispered divine knowledge into Noah's heart of great ark, of a storm that would wash the world clean, of a covenant yet to come. I find it powerful that divine justice is never impulsive, it's measured, deliberate, and exact. The punishment of the watchers wasn't just about vengeance, it was about restoring balance. Heaven didn't seek to destroy for the sake of wrath, but to cleanse what had been tainted. The watchers, once glorious, now trembled. They pleaded for mercy. They begged their children, the Nephilim, to send dreams and messages to Creator. One of them, Maweh, flew high above the earth to reach the heavenly tablets. He sought an answer, a glimmer of hope, but what he saw shattered him. A vision of complete annihilation. A deluge of water swallowing cities and mountains alike, names etched in light. Only Noah shall be spared. The rest, forgotten, drowned beneath divine judgment. Maweh brought this message to his fellow giants and the fallen watchers. Panic erupted. What can we do? They asked. Can the judgment be stopped? But it was too late. The heavens had spoken. The watchers were rounded up by the archangels, bound with chains forged from light. They were dragged to a vast chasm, the abyss, a prison beneath the earth where time stood still. There they would remain until the final judgment, watching the world they once corrupted be reborn without them. Their cries echoed through the void. As for the Nephilim, their fate was sealed. Some fought, some tried to flee. Others, like Maweh, accepted the end, but none survived the flood. The waters came. The skies split open. The fountains of the deep burst forth, and the earth groaned beneath the weight of divine wrath. Forests were uprooted, mountains submerged, and all creation was swept away in the tide. Only one man and his family stood against the storm, Noah, sheltered by the ark, chosen by God. This chapter reveals a sobering truth. No matter how mighty we become, we are not above consequence. The watchers were divine, yet their pride blinded them. The Nephilim were powerful, yet their hunger consumed them. Judgment is not a myth. It is the inevitable price of unchecked desire. The fall of the watchers is more than a tale of angels and giants. It's a mirror held up to our world. When we misuse power, when we glorify corruption, when we forget the purpose we were given, destruction follows. But even in the flood, there was hope. One man, one family, preserved by faith. And so the world would begin anew. As the earth trembled beneath the weight of their deeds, the Nephilim, once proud and dominant, began to feel the gnawing ache of despair. They were born of rebellion, shaped by lust and fed by blood. Yet now, even they sense a storm approaching. Among the Nephilim, Ohiah and Hiah, the twin sons of the fallen angel Shemaiah, were plagued by terrible dreams. In their visions, they saw the heavens open like a scroll and a blinding fire descend to cleanse the earth. They saw their own bones buried beneath mountains of ash. They saw their father, once radiant, chained and cast into a pit without end. Frightened, they turned to their kin. We must seek answers, Ohia pleaded. If these dreams are warnings, perhaps they can be undone. And so Mawe, the strongest among them, was chosen to fly beyond the mortal realm. With wings dark as storm clouds, he ascended into the heavens, seeking the counsel of the holy ones. But the gates of heaven were sealed. Angels, cloaked in flame, stood guard. They spoke not a word. Mawe was cast down, his wings scorched, his soul shaken. Still, he returned to his brothers with a fragment of revelation, just enough to ignite terror in their hearts. "We are cursed," he whispered, "and the flood is coming." What struck me most about this moment wasn't the violence or the wrath, but the silence. The gates of heaven did not open. No divine voice thundered a warning. There was only stillness, as if the Creator had already spoken and was now waiting for the consequences of disobedience to run their course. That silence speaks louder than any shout. In desperation, the watchers turned to one among them, Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, a man who walked with God. Though mortal, he had been granted visions beyond the veil, insight into the divine will. They sent messages to him, pleading, "Intercede for us. Speak to the Most High. Beg him to forgive our transgression." Enoch, burdened by the weight of their crimes, fasted and prayed. In a vision, he was taken to the realm beyond time, where he stood before the great glory. There, he received the answer. He returned with a message written in fire. "You shall have no peace. Your judgment is sealed. Your sons of giants shall perish by sword and by flood. And you, O watchers, shall be bound in the valleys of the earth until the end of days." When the watchers heard this, they wept. Their radiant forms darkened. Some raged. Some fell into silence. But all knew it was over. This moment feels tragic, not just because of the punishment, but because of the inevitability. There are choices we make that cannot be undone. Apologies cannot rewind time. Forgiveness is divine, yes, but sometimes justice must walk ahead of mercy. The watchers did not fall by accident. They chose their fate. And now, the world would bleed because of them. The Nephilim, once invincible, began to war among themselves. Hunger, fear, and madness consumed them. The skies darkened. The earth groaned. Nature itself seemed to rebel against their presence. But among humanity, a man named Noah found favor in the eyes of Creator. Pure in heart and just in action, he was chosen to build a vessel, not just a survival, but a hope. As hammers rang and wood was cut, the giants laughed. They mocked the ark and its builder. "You think a boat will save you from the wrath of heaven?" they jeered. But the skies did not answer. Not yet. The story of the Watchers and their giant offspring is more than myth. It's a mirror. It reflects our own capacity for corruption, for defiance, and for the illusion that power makes us untouchable. But even giants can drown. Even angels can fall. And sometimes the greatest punishment is knowing you can never go back. Thunder cracked the sky like a whip, and lightning scorched the mountaintops. The heavens that once wept in silence now roared in anger. This was no ordinary storm, it was a breath of divine judgment. And the Nephilim, those towering sons of angels and women, finally realized they were not gods. The ground split open. Oceans broke their boundaries. Mountains trembled. Animals fled. And in the center of it all, the ark stood quiet, unshaken as if the eye of the storm bowed before it. Inside, Noah prayed. Outside, the Nephilim screamed. They clawed at the rising waters, climbing cliffs, fighting one another, begging for mercy they had long forgotten how to give. Ohia, son of Shemaiah, stood on a crumbling peak, watching the end of his world. His eyes searched the heavens not for salvation, but for his Father. But Shemaiah was no longer in the skies. Far below, in the dark hollows of the earth, the Watchers had already met their fate. The archangel Raphael had descended like a blade of fire, and with the authority of the Most High, he had bound them in chains. Shemaiah, once glorious, now lay broken trapped beneath jagged rocks, blinded by remorse. "Is this the price of love?" he whispered, but no voice answered. Not from heaven, not from the pit, only the sound of silence and judgment. This wasn't merely destruction, it was a cleansing. The flood was not about revenge, it was about rebirth. The world had been poisoned not just by sin, but by unnatural corruption. The union of angel and human had bent creation itself. The giants were never meant to exist. Their blood tainted the rivers. Their presence mocked the balance of heaven and earth. And so, the Creator did not merely wipe the slate clean. He washed it with tears. One by one, the giants fell. Their screams echoed through the valleys, swallowed by waves and wind. Even the mighty Malway, with wings wide as canopies, was swept away, his final roar lost beneath the surface. But not all perished so quickly. The Book of Giants hints at a few who survived. Whispers speak of spirits that lingered, giant souls, torn from their flesh, now roaming as restless shadows. They became known in later texts as evil spirits or unclean spirits, hungry, angry, bound to the world they once ruled. And the Watchers, they remain imprisoned to this day, chained in the depths, waiting for a judgment yet to come to the end of all things. What do we learn from this? That no power, no knowledge, no beauty can shield us from the weight of consequence. The Watchers sought to bring light. Instead, they unleashed darkness. They loved passionately but without restraint. They taught but without wisdom. They ruled but without humility. And when their kingdom fell, it wasn't just them who suffered. The earth suffered. Humanity suffered. Rebellion always has a price, especially when it comes from those who knew better. As the waters receded, and the ark came to rest upon Mount Ararat, a new dawn broke. Noah and his family stepped into a cleansed world. The air was still, the ground soft, the promise of life renewed above them. A rainbow curved across the sky, a symbol not of destruction, but of covenant, a vow from the Creator. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. But below, deep in the unseen chambers of the earth, the Watchers remain. Their story not yet over. Their final judgment still awaits. And their legacy, it echoes through time, in myths, in monsters, in the very fear of what lies beyond the veil. Perhaps the real danger wasn't Nephilim. Perhaps it was what they represented. Pride without humility, passion without wisdom, knowledge without restraint. Those same seeds still exist in us. The story of the Watchers isn't just a tale of ancient rebellion. It's a warning, a mirror, a challenge to choose wisely what we chase and what we become. Because even now the giants still whisper, and the flood may come again not by water, but by fire, by chaos, by the unraveling of what holds us human. The flood waters have retreated, but the world was not the same. Forests were flattened, mountains reshaped. The bones of giants lay buried beneath layers of silt and stone, silent monuments to a forgotten war between heaven and earth. Noah walked upon this newborn land like the last echo of a vanished age. His every step was a prayer, his every breath a reminder that life had been spared, but only barely. The skies were quiet now, too quiet, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. But far beneath this peace, something stirred. The Book of Giants whispers of what came next. The bodies of the Nephilim had perished in the flood, but their spirits, their essence, could not return to heaven, nor descend fully to Sheol. They were cursed to wander, rootless, restless, ravenous. They became what later scriptures called evil spirits or roaming demons. Spirits without form, yet full of hunger, stripped of power, but not of will. They whispered into the dreams of men. They crept into sacred places. They followed bloodlines, waiting, watching. They were not forgotten, because they refused to be. The prophet Enoch, who had been taken before the flood, was shown these things in visions. He saw the spirits of the giants pleading with heaven. "Let us return," they cried. "Let us be given form again." But the answer from the Most High was cold as stone. "You shall not ascend. You shall not find peace. This shall be your curse for all generations." And so they drifted into the shadows of history, into the midst of cultures across the world, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from Babylon to the Norse sagas. The legends of mighty beings fallen, punished, and wandering echo the same ancient truth. There is something uniquely terrifying about unfinished sin. The Watchers acted. The Nephilim were born. And even after their destruction, the consequence remained. We often imagine sin as something we can bury. But what if it lingers? What if it lives on not just in memory, but in spirit? The story of the giants warns us. Not all legacies are noble. Some are nightmares passed down in blood and breath. And what of the Watchers? They did not die in the flood. No, their fate was darker. Raphael had bound them, cast them into the earth, into pits of gloom. The book of Enoch describes them imprisoned in a place of fire and stone, where they await the final judgment at the end of the age. There, Shemaiah lies still his once radiant wings broken, his eyes blind to the stars he once called home. There, Azazel screams in madness, surrounded by the very weapons he taught men to build. And there, beneath the crust of creation, the fallen angels more rebellion that cost them eternity. But some say they're not entirely gone, for though their bodies are bound, their knowledge remains. Their teachings once given to mankind still flow through the veins of civilization, from forbidden magic to the forging of weapons, from seductive beauty rituals to the twisting of justice. The Watcher's influence lingers. Some call it innovation, others corruption, but whatever name it wears, the shadow behind it whispers of wings once cast in light, and now wrapped in darkness. There is a reason the Book of Giants was lost for so long. It was buried, suppressed, hidden deep beneath layers of orthodoxy and fear. Why? Because it told too much. It connected too many dots. It exposed a version of history, not just spiritual, but cosmic. One where heaven and earth once collided, and the fallout still burned beneath our feet. And now, as fragments of that book resurface among the Dead Sea Scrolls, in ancient Aramaic scraps of truth begins to bleed through again. Truth that angels once loved. Truth that giants once ruled. Truth that our world is not as simple as we thought. But this is not the end. There is one more chapter in this tale, one final piece that brings it all together. Who was Gilgamesh, and why does the Book of Giants name him among the Nephilim? What secrets did Enoch leave behind before his ascent? And what warning echoes through time from the mouths of giants written not in ink, but in the scars of the earth itself? The Book of Giants ends not with salvation, but with silence. A strange, almost deliberate erasure. The names of the Nephilim once thundered across ancient valleys vanish from our records. The Watchers, once beings of celestial splendor, now remembered only in fragmented scrolls and veiled mythologies. But one name remained, One name echoed across ages, empires, and epics. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, the seeker of immortality, the hero who, according to the Book of Giants, was one of them, a giant, a Nephilim, a remnant. In the Book of Giants, Gilgamesh appears not as a mortal man, but as a mighty being caught in the final echoes of the ancient war. Gilgamesh, the giant who fought Umbaba, who walked with Enkidu, who sought the plan of life. The legends we know of his strength, his arrogance, his sorrow are not lies. They are memories, shadows of being caught between two worlds. Was he one of the last? A hybrid born before the flood, somehow surviving the wrath of heaven? Or was he a revival part of a darker plan to resurrect what once was? No one knows for sure, but the Book of Giants doesn't question his identity. It declares it. Gilgamesh, the giant, saw the visions, and perhaps more terrifyingly, he still walks. Why did Gilgamesh seek eternal life? Because he had tasted it. Because in his veins flowed the echo of the Watcher's rebellion. He was not like other men. He was not bound by the limits of earth. And yet, he feared death, because even giants die. Even legends fade. Even immortals, born of angels, tremble at the silence that follows the end. The Book of Giants doesn't just record a fall, it records a longing, a hunger, a curse, and Gilgamesh embodied it all. In his final visions, the prophet Enoch sees the fate of these beings. I saw the spirits of giants, and their sorrow was endless. He sees them begging for redemption. He sees the Watchers, chained in fire, pleading for mercy. He sees the world, still echoing with their footsteps. And then, silence. Enoch disappears from the narrative, not because his role ends, but because his message is complete. He told us what happened. He warned us what could come. And he left behind scrolls scattered, buried, waiting for those with eyes to see and hearts to listen. Why did the Book of Giants disappear? Why was it never canonized? Never preached? Never taught? Perhaps because it asks too much of us. It forces us to confront a terrifying truth, that our world has been touched by heaven and torn by it, that there are beings who love too deeply, who fell too hard, and who left a scar that still burns beneath our stories, and that those beings might return, not with swords, but with whispers, not in bodies, but in influence, in systems, in ideologies, in technologies that promise power without conscience, knowledge without humility, and beauty without truth. The Watchers may be chained, the Nephilim may be dust, but their legacy still lives. Across time, fragments of this truth survive. In the epic of Gilgamesh, in the visions of Daniel, in the Watchers of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, in the fallen stars of Revelation. It is a thread frayed, faint but unbroken, a warning woven into the tapestry of scripture, myth, and memory. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. The story of the giants is not over. It is only buried, waiting. The flood came. It swallowed the world in silence, washing away the cities of men, the temples of angels, and the towering bones of giants. Or so we were told. But beneath the silence, something lingered. A whisper, a remnant, a bloodline. The Watchers were gone, their Nephilim children destroyed, their cries silenced in the prison pits of the deep. But evil does not die so easily. It adapts, it hides, it waits before he vanished. The prophet Enoch wrote something curious, not about the past, but the future. And after the flood, when the waters have receded, the spirits of the giants shall rise once more to torment the sons of men. The Nephilim were not just flesh. They were spirit, and spirit cannot be drowned. They remained restless, disembodied, angry. They became what many would later call demons, not fallen angels, but the souls of dead giants, born of heaven and earth, but belonging to neither. Generations after the flood, whispers of great warriors began to resurface in the land of Canaan. They were called Anakim, the long-necked, the tall ones; Rephaim, the dead, the shades, the mighty; Zamzummim, a race that terrified even the giants. And they bore names eerily familiar: Bashan, scion of Heshbon, and others, lost to time but feared by all. These were not myths. They were enemies of Israel, enemies that even Moses, even Joshua, had to face in battle, enemies that bore the echo of a war that began before history. Today, we see them as metaphors. We say giants and think symbolic. But what if the Bible meant exactly what it said? What if Goliath really was over 9 feet tall? What if King OG's bed measured in cubits wasn't poetry, but inventory? What if the promised land was filled with Nephilim, not by accident, but because something wanted it that way? This is where the story continues. From Mount Hermon to Jericho, from the plains of Bashan to the valley of Elah, from ancient Babylon to the final chapters of Revelation, the return of the Nephilim is not fantasy. It is prophecy, and it's time to uncover how they came back, where they hide, and what they want now, because their war with heaven never ended. It only changed shape, and it might already be unfolding right before our eyes. The Book of Giants, Part 2, The Return of the Nephilim. Coming soon, we will explore the mysterious bloodlines after Noah, the role of Canaan, Ham, and the cursed generations, the true identity of the Anakim and Rephaim, how ancient Israel's conquest was more than a land war, it was a cosmic purge, and how the world today may still be dealing with the consequences. Stay subscribed. Stay vigilant. The giants are not just in the past. They are the key to everything hidden. The flood had receded. The ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. The world was quiet again. But peace is not the same as purity. Noah and his family stepped into a world washed clean. Yet the seeds of corruption were not fully destroyed. They were carried on board. 3 sons, 1 bloodline, and a curse that would ripple through history. Scripture tells of an unsettling event after flood. Noah, the righteous patriarch, plants a vineyard. He drinks. He lies uncovered in his tent. And Ham, his son, saw the nakedness of his father. The text is cryptic. Some scholars believe it's more than just voyeurism. Some say it was a violation of honor, of privacy, or worse. Whatever the true act was, Noah awakens in wrath not against Ham, but against Ham's son. Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Why curse the grandson? Unless the act had consequences. Unless a line had been tainted again. Canaan, the name that would haunt the children of Israel for generations. From this single man would rise cities so wicked they would burn under heavenly fire. Jericho, Hebron, Gaza, Ashdod, Sodom and Gomorrah. And within these lands, the giants returned, not as watchers, not as Nephilim of old, but as their descendants Anakim, Rephaim, Emim, Zamzummim. Somehow, the blood had survived, perhaps in Ham, perhaps in Noah's wife, as some traditions whisper. But regardless of the vessel, the result was the same. The Nephilim spirit endured. Rise of the Anakim. When Moses sent spies into the Promised Land, their report came back in fear. We saw the Nephilim, they're the sons of Enoch. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Anakim were more than just tall men. They were terrifying, engineered for war, bred for dominion, spawned from ancient blood, and they control key strongholds, walled cities, iron chariots, and elite warrior clans. The conquest of Canaan wasn't just geopolitical, it was spiritual warfare. God commanded the Israelites to utterly destroy certain tribes. Men, women, children, even livestock. To modern ears, it sounds cruel, but what if these tribes were not fully human? What if their bloodline threatened to reopen the gates of the old rebellion? One name stands out in the post-flood era. Og, king of Bashan, a land known as the realm of the Rephaim, the Shades, or Dead Ones. His bed was made of iron, over 13 feet long. Some said Og was the last of the ancient giants, but the truth is darker. Og was the last king of the old order, not the last of the Rephaim. They scattered, they hid, they infiltrated, and they would rise again in ways no one expected. Genetics, hybridization, spiritual warfare. We often dismiss these ancient tales as myth, but ask yourself, why do so many ancient cultures speak of gods mating with humans? Why are there skeletons, myths, and legends of giants on every continent? Why do secret societies trace bloodlines back to ancient Sumer, Egypt, and Canaan? Perhaps because the blood never left. It mutated, it mingled, it moved through history. The Watchers may be chained, but their legacy walks among us. The deeper mysteries of the Rephaim and their connection to the underworld, how giants influence pagan religions, human sacrifice, and fallen knowledge, why Israel's wars were targeted at specific bloodlines, the possible return of Nephilim through modern means. The war that raged in Canaan was not a simple conquest of land. It was a cosmic cleansing, a divine strike against the corrupted blood of angels. These were not ordinary enemies. They were hybrids, echoes of the original rebellion. And their extinction was not just ordered, it was necessary. For in them lived the last great resistance against heaven. From Bashan to Ashtaroth, from Gaza to Gath, the descendants of Nephilim had built kingdoms, fortified cities, pagan temples, blood-soaked altars where children cried out in vain. These places were not just strategic targets. They were spiritual infections. The rituals practiced within their walls, necromancy, cannibalism, child sacrifice, were designed to reconnect with the Watchers, to reopen the forbidden gates, to resurrect the old ones. Under divine command, Joshua launched a campaign unlike any other. In Jericho, walls crumbled by invisible force. In Gibeon, the sun itself stood still to prolong the battle, and from the heavens, hailstones fell, killing more than Israel's swords ever could. This wasn't just war, this was judgment. The mission was precise. Eradicate the tainted blood, leave no trace. Entire bloodlines were severed, cities reduced to ash, giants slain one by one. But the Watchers had always been cunning. Not all their children died. Some fled into the mountains of Turkey, the sands of Egypt, the forests of Europe. Legends whispered of their survival. The Tuatha Dé Danann in Ireland, the Anakim in hidden valleys, the Titans beneath the earth, the Nagas in the east, the Star People in Native American lore. They went by many names, but their essence remained the same, and the blood lived on. Then came Goliath of Gath, the last known remnant of the Nephilim, in open defiance. 9 feet tall, a warrior born of corrupted blood, a symbol of terror. And who did God choose to face him? A boy, a shepherd, with no armor, no sword, only faith. With a single stone, David did more than kill a giant. He ended a legacy. The giant fell. The curse broke. The battlefield was silent, but heaven rejoiced. The age of the giants ended, but their story didn't. Their blood seeped into the cracks of history, into royal lines, secret societies, occult orders. The watchers, though bound, still whisper, and their children, though hidden, still move. Some say they walk among us, that they rule from behind veils, that their return is already underway. Maybe not as giants, but as ideologies, technologies, and unseen empires. From Genesis to Revelation, the story remains the same. A heavenly rebellion, a corrupted bloodline, a war for the soul of mankind. It wasn't mythology, it was memory. And as prophecy unfolds, the question is no longer what happened. It is what comes next. If this story made you question the past and wonder about the future, you're not alone. We've only scratched the surface of an ancient conflict still shaping our world. Subscribe to join us as we uncover the hidden threads woven through history, mythology, and prophecy. Leave a comment below. Do you believe the bloodline still exists today? Have you encountered echoes of the Watchers? Like if this journey opened your eyes to a forgotten war. And most importantly, stay awake, stay watching, stay prepared, because the giants may be gone, but the war is far from over.